This talks about OSHA revised hazard communication standards. We already did a talk on hazard communication, but now OSHA has changed some things since I wrote that. And if you have any questions about this topic, ask your supervisor. OSHA revised hazard communication standards. The new information to learn is about SDS, which stands for Safety Data Sheet. The old sheet for chemicals to be listed on was called the Material Safety Data Sheet. We need to be trained in this new safety data sheet by December of this year, and all our books, the aware books in the Right to Know section, all need to be changed over by 12/15. The United Nations Globally Harmonized System, GHS. They made chemical labels and safety data sheets, SDS, formerly called Material Safety Data Sheets, MSDS, have the same format for displaying chemical information all around the world. I'm going to talk about the new label standard. All the labels have to have the following information. They have to have the product name, the supplier information, their phone number, address, name, precautionary statement, very important. This is where you'll find the first aid on the bottle or the chemical container. A phrase that describes recommended measures to be taken to minimize or prevent adverse reactions resulting from exposure to a hazardous chemical or improper storage or handling of a hazardous chemical. The hazard pictograms will be on the containers. I have this picture in our aware books in the Right to Know section, right after you go through the chemical contents of that section of the notebook. Right after that, I have this picture so you can look and see what these pictures mean, because I have a feeling I'll tell you now and you won't remember, but at least now you know where you can look to find the information. A single word is used to indicate the relative level of severity of a hazard and alert the reader to potential hazard on the label. The single words used are danger and warning. Danger is for more severe hazards, while warning is used for less severe hazards. A hazard statement. A statement assigned to a hazard class and category that describes the nature of the hazards of a chemical, including, where appropriate, the degree of the hazard. Supplemental information, and that's the last thing that you would find on the label. Here's an example of a sample label. The product identifier will be up top, the supplier information, precautionary statements. Again, that's where first aid is located, right down there. Whoops. There we go. Hazard pictogram. Remember, that's in the aware book right after, in the Right to Know section, right after the list of chemicals, the table of contents for them. The single word danger in the hazard statement and the supplemental information. We're going to talk about safety data sheets now. Section 1 is identification. That includes the product identifier, the manufacturer or distributor name, address, phone number, emergency phone number, recommended use and restrictions on use. Section 2, hazard identification, includes all hazards regarding the chemical and required label elements. Section 3, composition information on ingredients. This includes information on chemical ingredients, even trade secret claims. Section 4, remember Section 4, this is where the first aid measures are listed, and it might be on the test following this. That includes important symptoms, effects, acute, delayed, and required treatment. Section 5 is the firefighting measures, lists suitable extinguishing techniques and equipment and chemical hazards from a fire. Section 6 is accidental release measures. It lists emergency procedures, protective equipment, proper methods of containment and cleanup. Section 7, handling and storage, lists precautions for safe handling and storage, including incompatibilities. Section 8, exposure control, personal protection. The most important part here is the personal protection. This is where you would look to see if you need to wear gloves, a mask, goggles, etc. It also has permissible exposure limits, threshold limits, appropriate engineering controls. Section 9, physical and chemical properties, lists the chemical's characteristics, what it looks like. And Section 10, stability and reactivity, lists chemical stability and possibility of hazard reactions. Section 11, toxicology information includes routes of exposure, related symptoms, acute and chronic effects, numerical measures of toxicity. Section 12 is the ecological information. OSHA doesn't require that we talk about that, so we're not gonna. Section 13, disposable considerations. Again, OSHA doesn't require we talk about that. Section 14, transport information. We don't have to talk about that, but it's there. You can read it. Section 15, regulatory information. Again, OSHA doesn't require us to talk about that. And Section 16, other information. And that includes the data preparation or the last revision of the safety data sheet. So we'll look at a safety data sheet for Lysol. This is, first part is where all the identification for it is. Number 2 is the composition information and the ingredients. In here. Number 3, the hazard identification, and for Lysol it says it's toxic in contact with skin and if swallowed. 4 is first aid measures, and for Lysol it talks about if in doubt of harmful exposure, seek medical attention. So if you're not sure you had too much of the chemical or exposed to too much of the chemical, seek medical attention. Be careful, be safe. Inhalation, if you inhale too much, you need to get fresh air. Ingestion, if for some reason you ingest it, do not vomit, it says. Drink lots of water. If you get it on your skin, wash for 15 minutes with soap and water. And if you get it in your eyes, it says to flush for 15 minutes. Number 5, firefighting. Extinguishing the chemical, you need to use a fire extinguisher suitable for whatever the object the Lysol's on. So if it's wood or electrical, in our nursing home we have ABC fire extinguishers, so you can use that fire extinguishers on any of those substances. Hazardous combustion products, it's not combustible, but it does release a hazardous gas if it's on fire. Protective measures, basically this tells the firefighters that they need to wear a breathing apparatus if they're coming near Lysol that's in a fire. Accidental release measures. Personal precautions in a spill of Lysol would be to avoid direct contact with your skin, eye, and clothing. For spill cleanup, it just says to use an absorbent cloth. Handling and storage. Basically, you need, when you're handling it, avoid contact with your eyes and your skin. And it should be stored in a cool, dry, well-ventilated place. Exposure controls and personal protection. Number 8. Remember the PPE. You need to know that is number 8. And number 4 is first aid. That's right. In exposure controls and personal protection, it talks about ingredient names in Lysol. It talks about needing sufficient ventilation, gloves, eye protection if you think it's possible to get it in your eye. Also talks about wearing protective clothing and closed footwear. Let's see, what number am I on? Here's 9. Physical and chemical properties. The appearance of Lysol is clear, dark, and amber. It has a phenolic odor, and that's enough of that. Stability and reactivity, it's a very stable chemical. You need to avoid certain things because it can react with it, which would be, they're saying natural rubber, aluminum, brass, copper, galvanized iron. And it can be hazardous because, again, the toxic vapors, if it does get into a fire. Okay, 11. Toxicology information. Talks about the dose of exposure to Lysol greater than 500 milligrams per kilogram of weight would be a dangerous dose. Inhalation, it will irritate your mucous membranes. Ingestion, it will hurt your mucous membranes in your esophagus and your stomach. Skin, it can cause a burn if it's on there long enough, and dermatitis possibly. It can also burn your eyes. Ecological information. We don't need to go into that. OSHA doesn't require that. The same with the disposal considerations. Well, one thing they do say about the aquatic stuff is that it could be harmful to an aquatic environment. And for disposal considerations, you know, the local rules would determine that. Transport, again, OSHA doesn't require we talk about that. And then regulatory information, and again, we don't need to talk about that. OSHA doesn't address that. But we do in 16 other information, it will talk about the data preparation of the chemical. We'll do these later.